In this tutorial, we'll be building the login and the sign up functionality for the BoxOut product. Hey guys, and welcome back to the 5th or 6th episode of BoxOut series. In this series, we'll be building an open source food delivery service, and in today's video, we'll cover the login and sign up implementation on the customer app. If you want to follow along, you can go to github.com/FilledStacks/BoxOut. You can clone the repo and then open up the customer folder inside of the client folder. Once you've downloaded the code, you can open it up in your IDE of your choice. This is the UI that we'll be building today, and you can see that it has a lot of shared functionality. The first thing we can see is that both of the views has a title and a subtitle, and then there's a form section which is different, and then everything following that is also exactly the same. So because of this, we can build the code in a way to reflect this. There's another 3 to 4 form views if I remember correctly. So building the form functionality in a generic way will allow us to easily develop the next set of forms that follows login and sign up functionality. The form is not only the same visually but also in terms of the functionality, and we'll build the code base to reflect that exactly. For the view model, when we submit, we send the data to the Firebase authentication service, and then depending on the result, we either navigate to a success route or we set the validation message if there's an error. And that's basically all the functionality required for this form view. The stuff that we'll exclude from this tutorial is the already have an account text, because you can just use the back button to go back to the login view. We're going to exclude the styling of the form fields. We'll do the styling and the theming of the app in its own episode, and we'll also exclude the social authentication, since we'll do that along with the mobile authentication in its own episode. With that out of the way, we can start the implementation of this functionality. We'll start off by creating this shared widget UI. This will be a widget called authentication layout, which will be the base UI for all of the form views. In the UI folder, create a new folder called DOM widgets. And inside this folder, create a new file called authentication layout. Then we'll import the material package and we'll create a new stateless widget called authentication layout. And based on this screenshot, we can see that we've defined a bunch of properties that will be shared for each of the authentication views. Let's start off by adding all of those properties into this widget. We'll add the title as a string. We'll add the subtitle as a string. We'll add the main button title as a string. Then we'll pass in a widget for the form, and since the terms text is only visible on the create account view, we'll pass in a boolean that we can set to true or false to show that text. Then we'll pass in a callback function called onMainButtonTapped. Then we'll pass in another function called onCreateAccountTapped. Then we'll pass in a function for when the forgot password text is tapped, and we'll also pass in a function for when the back button that's on screen is tapped. Then we'll pass in a string for the validation message, and lastly we'll pass in a boolean to indicate if this form layout is busy or not. To quickly add this to your constructor, if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can press Ctrl and full stop, and then you can select add final field values to your constructor. I think on Mac it's Command full stop. For the body of this widget, we'll first add the padding with the edge insets of 25, and for the child of this padding we'll set a list view. Then we can start with the actual UI for the layout. Just as a refresher, this is how the UI will look. As you can see, the first thing we'd have to do regardless of the view that we are on is this back button. It'll be hidden on this view, but we need to add it in there. Second thing is our titles and our subtitles. Then we'll set the widget for the form. We'll do the main button, and then we'll do our additional terms text or the create account text. We'll start by checking if the onBackPressed function is equal to null. If it is null, we want to show a large vertical space. Then we're going to check if the backpressed function is not equal to null, and if that's the case, we want to instead show a regular space. Finally, for the UI, if the onBackPressed function is not equal to null, we want to show an icon button with the padding set to 0 and the alignment of the button set to the center left so that it's aligned with the left side of our view's padding. And for the icon, we'll pass in the arrow back iOS icon we'll set the color to black, and then we'll pass the onBackPressed function to the onPressed property. Now to handle these missing vertical spaces. This is a part of a set of widgets that I use for sizing and some helper functions that helps with the building of UI. So in the UI folder, create a new folder called shared. And in this folder, create a new file called UI helpers. Then we'll add some constant widgets for horizontal spacing and vertical spacing with some fixed sizes. We'll create a constant widget called horizontal space tiny, and we'll set that equal to a sized box with the width set to 5. Then we can duplicate this line of code by pressing Alt Shift and the down arrow. We'll change the name to small, and we'll change the value to 10. Then we'll do this 3 more times for regular, medium, and large. Regular will have a size of 18, medium will have a size of 25, and large will have a size of 50. And then we'll do the exact same thing for vertical spacing, and the only difference would be that we'll change width to height. Now back in the authentication layout, you can import the UI helpers file. And that's it for our first set of shared UI. Next up, I want to create some styles that will be used throughout the building of this app. So in that shared folder, create a new file called styles. We'll import the material package. Then we can start by creating the color objects. We'll create a const color called KC primary color, and this will have a value of 22A45D. That is the hex code, and to pass in a hex code, you replace the hash or pound character with 0xFF. And then we'll create another color called KC medium gray color, and the value for this will be 868686. The naming convention for putting the letter K in front of a constant is to indicate that it is a global constant. The other part of the naming convention we decided on ourselves, and that is to put the first letter of the type of constant that we are supplying. C will be for color, so KC will be all the colors will pop up in your autocomplete. We have the same naming convention and setup for text styles. So next up, we'll add a text style. We'll create a constant of type text style called KTS medium gray body text. This will be a new text style with the color medium gray color and the font size set to the K body text size variable, which will be 16. The K body text size value will be a constant double called K body text size with a value of 16. We are storing all of the font sizes in values so that we always refer to one of the font sizes that we know are defined for the app designs UI. Then we can move on to setting up the title and the subtitle for the authentication views. First thing we'll add after the icon button is the title text. We'll give it a style where we just set the text style equal to a font size of 34. Then we'll add a small vertical space. And then when you look at the UI, you'll see that the subtitle text actually never goes past about 70% of the screen. I would put it at 70 just so that we have a nice round number. So what we'll do is artificially create that by putting the subtitle text in a sized box. We'll put the subtitle text as our child, and for the style, we will use K text style TS, and we'll select the first one because it's the only one we have. And to create the artificial wrapping of the text, which designers like to do, we'll set the width equal to the value of a function called to screen width percentage and passing in 0.7. This function still has to be created, so in the UI helpers we'll add 4 functions that I usually use when working with responsive or view-based sizing. So open up the UI helpers file, then we'll add a new section for screen size helpers. The first function we'll do is called screen width, which will return the width of the size from the media query. And then we'll duplicate this line and we'll change the width to height. Then we'll use these functions to create a new function. We'll create a function called screen height percentage. It will take in the build context and then also an optional named parameter called percentage. We'll give it a default value of 1. And this function will return calling the screen height and multiplying the percentage value. The value for the percentage will be between 0 and 1. Then we'll duplicate this line of code and we'll do the same for the width. Then we'll add a space between this and the form to follow. We'll set the form exactly as is. Then we'll add another regular space. Then underneath the form, we have the optional forget password UI, which will only be shown if we supply the onForgetPassword tapped function callback. So we'll start off by checking if the callback is not null. Then we'll use the align widget and we'll align to the center right. And the child of this widget will be a gesture detector. We'll supply the onForgetPassword callback to the onTap property. And the child of this gesture detector will be text with the value forget password. And for the style, we'll supply the gray body text and we'll copy that with the font weight set to bold. Then we'll add a space between the forgot password and the next set of widgets. Then we want to add our validation message. We'll check if the validation message is not equal to null. Then we'll add a text widget with the validation message as well as the style set to the color red and the font size set to the medium body size. And if the validation message is not equal to null, we also want to add an additional regular space. Then we'll build a custom full width call to action button. This will be wrapped in a gesture detector. For the onTap property, we will pass in onMainButton tapped. For the child, we'll pass in a container. The width of the container will be set to double.infinity. The height will be set to 50. The alignment of the children of this container will be center. And for the decoration, we'll pass in a box decoration, the color set to KC primary color, and a border radius of 8. And for the child of this widget, we will check the busy value. If it is busy, we want to supply a circular progress indicator and we'll set the value color equal to an always stopped animation with the color white. And if it's not busy, we want to show a text widget with the value main button title. And for the style, we'll set a text style with the color white, font weight bold, and the font size 14. And following that, we have a vertical regular space. And then the last piece of UI will be the optional UI for the create account or the terms and conditions text. We'll check if onCreateAccount has been supplied. And if it has, we'll create a gesture detector. And for the onTap property, we'll pass in onCreateAccount tapped. For the child of this gesture detector, we'll create a row. We'll set the main axis alignment to center. And for the children, the first child will be text that says don't have an account with a question mark. Then we'll add a tiny horizontal space. And then we'll add another text widget with a value create an account. For the style of this text, we'll create a text style with the color set to the KC primary color. And then the last bit of UI is to show the terms text. We'll check if show terms text is true. And then we'll create a new text widget with the value by signing up you agree to our terms, conditions, and privacy policy. Then for the style, we'll supply the KTS gray body text and we'll align this text to the center. The full file can be found on github.com/FilledStacks/BoxOut. Then we can go ahead and use this in the login and the create account view. We'll create a new folder in the UI folder called login. And inside of that folder, we'll create a new file called login view. We'll use the stacked snippet for view creation to create the login view. And then we create another new file called login viewmodel. Then in the login view, we can make use of the authentication layout that we just built. For the body of the scaffold, we can set the authentication layout widget. We'll start in by passing in the isBusy value from the model. Then we'll pass in the onCreateAccount tapped callback function, but we'll just pass in the empty function for now. We'll pass in the validation message from the model to the validation message property. For the title, we'll set it equal to welcome. The subtitle will pass and enter your email address to sign in and enjoy your food. For the main button title, we'll pass in sign in all caps. And for the form, we'll pass in a column. The first child will be a text field. we'll give it a decoration with a new input decoration, setting the label text to email. Then we can duplicate that and change the label text to password. And then lastly, we'll pass in the onForgotPassword tapped function as an empty function. Actually, we can remove the validation message since we haven't implemented that functionality in the view model yet. Then we can copy and paste the login folder inside of the UI folder and change it to create account. Then we'll change all of the view names as well as the class names to reflect create account instead of login view. We'll keep the is busy there. We'll remove the on create account tapped property being supplied. We'll change the title to create account. We'll change the subtitle to enter your name, email and password for sign up. We'll change the main button title to sign up. For the form, we'll add one additional text field called full name. We'll remove the onForgotPassword callback function and we'll set show terms text to true. To test this out, we'll go over to the main file and we'll comment out the onGenerated_route function. Then we'll set the home view equal to the login view. So as you see, we're getting a null error, so we should give a default value to the show terms text of false. And given that busy will probably throw the same error, we'll set the default value for busy to false as well. Then we can restart the app. And there we have it, a basic UI that kind of resembles our original plan for the UI. Some things to see that doesn't look correct besides the styling of the forms is the fact that this text isn't actually wrapping where we want it to wrap. And to fix that, we can simply wrap the sized box in an align widget that aligns to the center left. Next up, we'll do the base form functionality. So we'll start with the authentication view model, which will be the base view model for the login and the create account models. In the UI folder, create a new folder called base, and in this folder, create a new file called authentication view model. This will be an abstract class called authentication view model and extends the form view model. So just make sure you are on the latest stacked version before using the form view model. We'll implement the set form status function so that each of the overriding classes will not have to implement that function as well. We will need to implement this if we want to do any real-time validation on our client-side form. So we'll create a new function that returns a future called save data. We'll create a function definition called run authentication that returns a future with a type Firebase authentication result. This function will have no definition and will have to be implemented in each of the extending view models that uses the authentication view model. Then the first thing in the save data function is to run this function and store the result. Since we want the view to be set to busy while this function is executing, we'll wrap this in a run busy future function call. Then we'll check if the result is successful. Then we'll check if the result does not have an error. And if it doesn't have an error, we want to navigate to a success route. To do that, we have to pass in a success route into the constructor. We'll pass in the success route string and mark it as required. Then to perform the navigation, we also have to get the navigation service from our locator. And then we can use that to call replace with and navigate to our success route. If the result does have an error, we want to set that error as the validation message. And that's everything that we need for our shared functionality for a form view. Let's go ahead and implement the login view model. We'll extend from the authentication view model. We'll use control full stop to create the missing override. We have to pass in the success route into the super constructor. So we'll create a new constructor and pass in routes.addressSelectionView as the success route. We'll create this view and generate the route later. Then we'll need the Firebase authentication service from the locator. And for the run authentication function, we'll simply call login with email and pass in the email value and the password value. And since we know the login view model has to navigate to the create account view, we'll create a void function called navigate to create account, and this function will call navigate to on the navigation service and pass in routes.createAccountView. To get the code compiling, we will create an address selection view and then just update our router. So in the UI folder, create a new folder called address selection. And in that folder, create a new file called address selection view and address selection view model. We'll create a base view model called address selection view model. And we'll create a base stack view called address selection view. Then we can replace the second view with address selection view. We can duplicate that twice, change the one to create account view and the last one to login view. Then we can move the initial value from the startup view down to the login view for now. In addition to that, we'll also register our Firebase authentication service, pass in a singleton dependency type, and the class type will be of type Firebase authentication service. Now, before we generate the new router, let's also set up the forms to be functional and sync the user's input to the view model. Go to the login view, and then we'll set up this login view to be a automatically synced form to our view model's data. We'll start by adding the form annotation to the view. We'll create two form text fields. We'll create a form text field for email, and we'll create a form text field for password. Then we'll add the mixin onto the widget. The mixin name is a $sign followed by the name of the widget that the annotation is on. Then to perform the automatic sync with the view model, we have to call a function in onModelReady called listen to form updated and pass in the model. And the last thing to do is to assign the email controller and assign the password controller. Then we can do the same thing for the create account view. We add our form view annotation. The fields we can copy from the login view, and we'll add a full name field as well. Then we'll add the mixin that will be generated, and in the onModelReady callback, we'll call listen to form updated. We'll assign the full name controller, we'll assign the email controller, and we'll assign the password controller. Before we generate, make sure that the stack generator is on the latest version 0.2.4. Then we can run Flutter pub run build runner build delete conflicting outputs. Then you can open up the login view and import the newly generated login view.form.dart file. When using a mixin, your constructor cannot be constant, so we'll remove that. Then you can go to the login view model and import that same file. That's where the extensions are for the view model to get the value out of the form value map. You can open up the create account view and then import createAccount.form.dart. Remove the const constructor. Then open up the view model and we'll implement the authentication functionality which is still left for the create account view. We'll extend from the authentication view model. We'll create a constructor and pass to the super constructor the success route of the address selection view. We'll create the missing override, then get the Firebase authentication service from the locator. And for the run authentication function, we'll call create account with email and pass the email value as well as the password value. These properties are available on the form file that has been generated. So we'll import create account view.form.dart. And then we also know that this view will have the on-screen back button which will need to be called on the view model. So we'll create a new function called navigate back, and that function will call back on the navigation service. And the last thing we need to do is make sure we pass in all the properties required by the authentication layout to display and act accordingly. For the create account view, we have to pass in the function to call when the main button is tapped. and that will be save data. Then we have to pass in the function to call when the back button is tapped. And then lastly, we also have to pass in the validation message. Then you can go to the login view where we'll do the same thing. We'll pass to the on main button tapped property the save data function. For the on create account tapped function call, we'll pass in the navigate to create account function. And then we'll also pass in the validation message. There's some old code floating around for the second view, so you can just remove that from your errors and it should compile. Before we run the code, we should run the Flutter pub run build runner build command again, because we changed the constructors of the login view as well as the create account view. Then we need to set back the working routing functionality. So open up the main.dart file and uncomment the onGenerate route function and comment out the home property where we pass in the login view. When you run this code now, your form should be working exactly as expected. We can test out the validation message by logging in with a non-existent account. It will give us the error saying there's no user record corresponding to this identifier. If we then go and create an account, we sign up, we should navigate to the address selection view. And that is it for the form login and create account functionality. We built it this way because we have 4 to 5 other forms in this code base that will have to be built, and they all use the exact same functionality. For the next video, we'll be doing social authentication for Facebook as well as Google. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.